All right, man, peace. So, in many of the videos that I've done in the past, I've touched on the concept of the quote unquote television revolutionary. Notable figures like Shannon Sharpe and Stephen A. Smith, and many of the either former athletes or quote unquote black sports analysts, black pundits that they put on television. Their job is to act as an intermediary and a false ambassador for so-called black people, and an intermediary between the masses of black people and the Caucasian elite who they're serving. They're known as the quote unquote boule. All right. Basically the servant to the king or the advisor to the king. During the Greco-Roman time period, you had something called the buletes. That's who the Sanhedrin were, for those of you who read the scriptures. Like Joseph of Arimathea, he was a member of the buletes. He was a very, very affluent Israelite who also was the uncle of quote unquote Jesus Christ, who we know as Yahweh Shai. But he was someone who was extremely interested in and galvanized by Christ because he knew who he was, that he was the Messiah. Just getting back to the point, trickling down to the modern day time, the boule are who you call the upper crust members of the Divine Nine, and also many of the quote unquote black notables who have ascended to high levels of Luciferianism, whether it be as a so-called Mason or Shriner or whatever you want to call them. They're entrusted with certain secrets, and in return, they must make sure that they keep the black masses under control by making them believe that their goal should be to come together with so-called Caucasians. And that brings us to people like Mr. Greg Popovich. I've mentioned Greg Popovich before on my channel. To me, Greg Popovich, very obvious to me that he understands the black psyche very well. So-called black people are always looking for a hug. They're always looking for a bone to be thrown towards them by an affluent Caucasian man. And he does a very good job of playing the liberal coach, the liberal NBA coach, him and Steve Kerr, who, interestingly enough and ironically enough, even though there's really no irony in it because I know really what both of their motivations are, they both have CIA backgrounds, CIA ties. And isn't it interesting that they're the two liberal woke coaches in the NBA? Well, Greg Popovich was asked by a reporter about the importance of celebrating Black History Month. And Greg Popovich went into his spiel about how the NBA is majority black and therefore they should celebrate quote unquote Black History Month. And it's going to bring about or inspire the all black panel on the NBA television show Inside the NBA, not the mainstream cast with Charles and Shaq and Kenny, but the backup group with Chris Webber and Isiah Thomas, Baron Davis, Shaq, to do something that I tell you, brothers, happens all the time, which is why you cannot trust black athletes as leaders. They have too much invested in this society. They just start to speak so glowingly about Greg Popovich. It shows you how compromised they are. And when you're dealing with affluent people in this society, you could never expect them to tell you the truth because they have too much to lose if the society collapses. In the end, or at the end of this segment, Isiah Thomas is going to drop a major bomb, though. So pay very close attention. Of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Well, fellas, it's time to step away from basketball for just a moment. Earlier this week, the Boston Police Department posted a tweet. The tweet was meant to honor the Celtics' legendary Red Auerbach during Black History Month. Now, Auerbach, who is white, was the first NBA executive to draft a black player in 1950, and the first to put an all-African-American team on the floor in 1964, and the first to hire a black man, Bill Russell, as his head coach. The tweet was heavily criticized and then deleted.
As it should have been heavily criticized. But Chris Webber is going to show you that he has, or that he suffers from a psychosis that many so-called black people suffer from, which is an over-dependence and an overindulgence in the potential for a coming together, a unifying of the so-called black and so-called white race. So-called black people are so infatuated with this delusion, this phenomenon, that they neglect what's really important, which is the restoration of culture. And that's the seed behind all the problems that our people have. But because they're so infatuated with the Caucasian and every little bone that the Caucasian throws, they get thrown off balance. They get thrown off course. So-called blacks should have been upset when Red Auerbach was highlighted in so-called Black History Month, because first off, Black History Month is an embarrassment to so-called black people, because all they do is talk about slave history, which is mostly narrative. They leave out most of the essential aspects of so-called black history, and it's not the Caucasians' responsibility to inform so-called black people about their real history. It's not their responsibility. Black History Month is really set up as an appeasement, as a distraction. And you're going to see how easily these brothers on the panel get distracted by Greg Popovich and his rather simple-minded and simplistic spiel.
And then the Boston PD apologized. Now, earlier Tuesday at Spurs shoot-around, Coach Greg Popovich, who had been compared to Red Auerbach, was asked about the importance of celebrating Black History Month, and he didn't hold back. Take a listen.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious. The league is made up of a lot of black guys, so to honor that and understand it is pretty simplistic.
Well, I think that he's saying a lot there, even though it might seem like he's saying a little. He's saying a lot, even though he's trying to say a little, and he's trying to say a lot. At the end of the day, he states that the league is made up of a lot of black guys, so we should celebrate Black History Month. In other words, he's recognizing the fact that it's an appeasement for so-called black people, that they're making billions of dollars off of the black men who run up and down and entertain and act basically as minstrels. And when I say minstrels, I don't mean that in a demeaning way. The term minstrel simply means entertainer or servant, and that's their job in this society. The job of the sportsman is to keep people entertained, to help them get through their day, particularly in a society where most people are drastically depressed. As I've stated numerous times on this channel, the reason why I watch sports is because sports is a microcosm for the human condition, the various aspects of human nature. You get to see who responds well under pressure. You get to see who folds up. You get to see how people relate to one another. The various dynamics that can build or crumble any organization or unit based off of who's ready to rise, who's ready to fall, who conforms, who doesn't conform, things of that nature. Point being is this: Greg Popovich, he sees the forest through the trees. He knows that when you want to get the best out of your slave, you have to make the slave think that they're not a slave. That's what that boils down to. He's very, very shrewd. And that is why I harp on the fact that this man has CIA psychological manipulative training. All right? Please keep that in mind. He knows that most so-called black people are starving, not just for attention, but for the Caucasian man's attention. Just like how I spoke on how many so-called black women, they'll take a compliment from a non-black man to a higher, with higher esteem than they would a so-called black man complimenting them. In the same way, many so-called black men, unfortunately, take a compliment from a Caucasian man with higher esteem than they would a compliment from a so-called black man. They'll take a Caucasian man stating that America is in dire straits racially with higher esteem than they would another so-called black man saying it. You know why? Because the dream is to come together with the so-called white man. It's not to come together with another black man. The so-called black man believes that his salvation is holding hands with the white man, not with holding hands with his brother. And when I say I don't mean every brother, obviously, but a large amount, a sizable portion of so-called black men believe that it would be a greater thing to unify with the Caucasian than to unify with their own. But let's see what he has to say.
How would you ignore that? But more importantly, we live in a racist country that hasn't figured it out yet.
See, that's the liberal credo right there. We live in a racist country that hasn't figured it out yet. Well, how is it that you guys haven't figured it out yet and you've been talking about it for all these years? Between the liberal Caucasian and the liberal so-called black man, you guys have not brought your heads together to figure out this quote-unquote racist situation. Why is that? You know why that is? Because there is no real solution. It's a necessity to keep the so-called black man spinning in place, going neither forward nor backward, making him think that we're all working on a solution for you. It's like somebody who's in a waiting room. He has a very, very severe disease. He's waiting in the waiting room for the doctor to come out and get him. And they keep telling him, you know what? Just give it a few more minutes. They have no plans of coming out there to get you, to operate on you. You don't have the right insurance, or you don't have enough money. You're not important enough. You're just not important enough to help heal you. But they do need you. Because as I told you brothers before, the so-called black man is more valuable than fine gold. When you look at the fact that so-called black men are literally at the epicenter of most of the most important aspects of American quote-unquote culture, that being sports, entertainment, the drug trade, and the prison industrial complex. They need you to feel like they care about your issues. They need you to feel that. Greg Popovich can't come on TV and say, who cares about Black History Month? He'll never get a free agent again. He has to create this cult of personality around himself that he is this super liberal Caucasian man who cares. He has to.
Out yet, and it's always important to bring attention to it, even if it angers some people. The point is that you have to keep it in front of everybody's nose so they understand it still hadn't been taken care of and we have a lot of work to do. Yeah,
well, get back to me when you figure out what that plan is, Greg. Because once you start talking about racial issues and you're a public figure, then yes, you should be held accountable to see if you're actually going to be about what you're talking about. I'm not saying that Greg Popovich is the leader of the Ku Klux Klan behind closed doors. I'm not saying that he's a terrible person. I'm not saying that he's kidnapping black babies and sacrificing them to Baal. All right, at least not necessarily. Who the hell knows what he's doing behind closed doors? Who the hell knows? Point being is this. He is not what he's trying to crack himself up to be. Okay? He's not that. And seeing as him and Steve Kerr are so focused on speaking on non-basketball issues, they should have their feet held over the fire in regards to what their plans are. You know, a lot of these internet revolutionaries, they love to come on the internet and talk about reparations. It just shows you how minuscule their thought process is. In order for the U.S. government to reimburse so-called black people for what they've done, they would have to literally empty every bank vault. They have to empty every bank vault. How could they pay you back with money that doesn't exist? The money that we currently use is not real money. This is how silly and simple-minded the internet revolutionary is. Brothers, once again, this is why I make videos about the economy. When you hear these Negroes talking about reparations, all they're showing you is that they don't understand how the worldwide economy works. They don't even let you use real money. They make you use play money. You're doing real work for play money. And then they get on TV and they play a violin for you to appease you, to make you think that they're on your side so that you won't rebel and turn against them. That's why I tell the liberal Negro, the pro-black, the internet revolutionary, don't come on my channel talking about who's a coon and who's this and who's that. Either start the revolution or go back to a majority black country, since you guys claim to love being black so damn much. Greg Popovich needs you. He needs you to want to be around him so that he can maintain his affluence. He needs you.
You know, fellas, I don't really know the relationship between the Boston PD and those that were upset. But just my feeling on a man like Red Auerbach, when we celebrate Black History Month, I do think that it's a part of Black History Month. The fact that it showed how great a team could be with opportunities for black players.
It showed how great a team could be with opportunities for black players. Or did it show how great Red Auerbach could make himself if he was able to take advantage of the talent of the black athlete? Once again, Red Auerbach is a so-called Jew. which means that he most likely is an adherent of the Talmud. And look, let me say this quickly, and I mentioned this before. There's a reason why almost every so-called black advocacy group in the 20th century was led by a Caucasian Jew, whether it was the NAACP or most of the socialist organizations who trained people like A. Philip Randolph and Martin Luther King, etc. Wherever you found an affluent black leader, especially if he was in favor of integration, there was a Caucasian Jew puppeting him. Okay? Why is that? Because they want the other nations to be confused while they take all the money. That's how that works. So once again, when you hear these people like Shannon Sharp get on TV and talk about how come black people can't get reparations and the Jews can, it's because the Jews control the money. They control the banks. When you get a return to your culture, then you can build a stronger intraracial economy, and then you can stipulate how the flow of money, how it moves. That's why it's called currency, because it moves. When our people stop trying to force this unity with the Caucasian, then you'll be able to amplify your own dividends. You'll be able to bring in more money, more currency towards your own, since you claim that's what you're concerned about. But no, Red Auerbach should not have been recognized on no damn Black History Month. Black History Month is a sham. And no, maybe he should have, because this shit is a sham anyway. It's a sham anyway. It's not real so-called black history.
And he gave those players the chance, whether it was the players that he drafted, whether it was the players that he put into coaching. And I just called a friend of mine, Dr. Harry Edwards. I think all you guys know him. And
yes, the Marxist extraordinaire, Harry Edwards, the guy who was trying to manipulate all the top black athletes of the late 60s. The guy who ruined the lives of John Carlos and Tommy Smith. You know, when he convinced them to throw up the Marxist fist in the air, the black fist for Saturn, and ruin their life. That's what I mean when I say, brothers, these guys pump you up to get involved in all these pseudo-revolutionary groups. And then when you get totally disenfranchised, they're nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, Harry Edwards is still running around in sports circles, being used as a fake-ass motivational speaker for so many of these sports teams. He's been under the employ of the San Francisco 49ers for many years. Many years. And when you look back at Harry Edwards, for any of you brothers who research him, all he was a big rabble-rouser and a Marxist from the mid-'60s and late 60s, man. But these guys, they always bounce back on their feet and get employed, either in the government or through the government as professors in universities, or with these sports teams. I wonder why that is. You should ask yourself why many of the more affluent members of the Black Panthers are now allowed to teach at high-level institutions across the United States. Maybe it's because after they were allowed to decompress, they were made to realize that your agenda is not that far off from many of the people who are sprinkled throughout the government's agenda, and that is to promote Marxism and socialism. So, you have to be very, very careful who you decide to align yourself with.
And he gave me a couple quotes, and I just want to just say this so I don't mess it up. But he said, it's not black history, it's not white history, it's American history. You can't talk about white history without black history and vice versa. He said it's like talking about the ocean and not including water. And
now, did you see what Harry Edwards said there? Brothers, once again, this is why I use the term so-called black, and I made this statement, I put forth this sentiment a long, long time ago on this channel. As long as you keep trying to hold on to that term black as a nomenclature for your race or who you are, you're always going to be intrinsically linked to the Caucasian. You're never going to be self-defined. Never. All right? So that's the point of the color coding racial designations. To make sure that you cleave onto the Caucasian, man, because you cannot have white without black, just like you can't have black without white. That is why, if you pay attention, it seems as if the so-called black race and the so-called white race are overly infatuated with one another. It's due to that color coding, which has created an affinity for one another, a bond with one another that is unhealthy for both parties, to be quite frank with you. And what the liberal Caucasian does they try to make sure that that bond that was created through the color naming for the races, the so-called black and white race, they try to make sure that that bond stays strong because they know they need that bond to stay strong to continue to use and manipulate the so-called black man and woman. So that's just one of a myriad of reasons why I use that term pro-black or so-called black or quote unquote black, because that's not a real racial term. That's not a real racial designation. When you go any other place on the planet Earth, they'll give you their tribe. Most of our people don't want to be bothered with the intricacies of, number one, finding out what their alleged tribe is and going back and living amongst their so-called tribe. What they want to do is just sit on the internet and talk shit all damn day.
I do think that in order to honor our struggle, we have to honor all of those that helped in the struggle, that contributed to the struggle. And this is a time when it didn't necessarily afford them any great luxuries except for winning, which was a big luxury at that.
Which was the main luxury at that time, bro. See, Chris Webber is a former quote unquote black nationalist who is now, as he's aged, grown into a globalist phase. And this is what I tell you brothers all the time about the so-called pro-blacks. They're really pro-white. Eventually they get old enough to figure out that many of the ideologies that they believe in don't really have an end game, and then they just start to embrace globalism. That's why I laugh at them. And the fact of the matter is that the reason why they end up becoming globalists is because they're not interested in learning what their real culture is, because it'd be too hard for them. For most people who truly have a depth of character, they understand that the road to trying to find out what the truth is going to be a lonely path. And human beings in general are communal. That, you know, the societal structure of the human being is based in community coming together. So therefore, most people who are searching out truth are unwilling to take that lonely path. So they end up just becoming conformists. He's going through this whole big rigmarole to make excuses for why Red Auerbach should be recognized on quote unquote Black History Month, which tells me, for the most part, that most of these so-called pro-blacks, and Chris Webber probably still is one, he definitely used to be one, most likely don't even know enough about so-called black history to fill in the 28 days. So they have to start throwing Caucasians in there and justifying it. They spent most of this segment trying to glorify first Red Auerbach and then Greg Popovich.
Luxury at that time. But, you know, Zeke, and I'll get to you, the big fella, want to hear what...
And also, let me say this. As Chris Webber himself noted, what Red Auerbach had to win was far greater than what he had to lose. By him bringing in black athletes, he knew that he was going to give himself the competitive advantage over his opponents. I mean, was Bear Bryant, does he deserve to be recognized during Black History Month because he added so-called black players to the Alabama Crimson Tide when his team got their asses kicked, I believe, by USC? No, he just realized that in order to keep up with the Joneses, he had to add some niggas. So if you want to recognize Red Auerbach for anything, recognize him for being ahead of the curve.
I want to hear what everybody thinks, but, you know, for what Rod Auerbach did, their relationship of being humans, he and Bill Russell. Bill Russell couldn't stay at hotels with his team. Bill Russell.
You hear that rhetoric? Humans. That's normal globalist rhetoric. We're all humans. Like, you'll hear people say that there's only one race, the human race. No, sir. The term race means seed. Okay? The term race means seed. So, therefore, in order for you to understand what your race is, you must know where your seed line comes from. Because that's going to determine your culture, your language, your belief system, etc. That has been, for the most part, taken away from so-called black people. They've been disenfranchised of that. And that wasn't necessarily just taken away by the Caucasian. Our people have played a gigantic role in taking away their own culture by not adhering to it. Because our people were not loyal and faithful to their culture. That's what allowed it to be stripped from them in the first place. Please understand that I do not adhere to the strict narrative of the Caucasian brought 400 million black people on the bottom of a sailboat from the west coast of Africa here to America. And Isiah Thomas understands that too. He's going to touch on it. He's going to say he's going to make a statement that is rather simplistic, but at the end, he's going to also bring forth a sentiment that many people don't know about. And that is pertaining to the black aboriginals of America. So Isiah Thomas, as usual, is very intelligent. Unfortunately, he's also a globalist.
Bill Russell was treated certain ways and could go to Red Auerbach and say, Coach, and if I have a son and my son says, Dad, I can't stay in the same hotel with my daughter, I have to say, well, the family not staying there then, son. And so to me, the things he did in a time when it wasn't popular, as an athlete, I say thank you to Bill Russell, Kareem, others that came before me, but I definitely say thank you to those that were the forerunners of giving opportunities to those that maybe didn't look like them.
Yeah. Well, maybe they just gave opportunities to people because they were trying to improve their business. In order for your business to grow, you have to reach out to other markets that you might not naturally gravitate towards. Once again, Red Auerbach was a Caucasian Jew. He's business-minded. And just like Greg Popovich, am I saying that he is the worst Caucasian man in the world, that he was kidnapping black children and sacrificing them? No, I'm not saying that. But once again, just like Popovich, who the hell knows? Who the hell knows? What I do know is that Red Auerbach understood that in order for him to gain a competitive advantage, he had to reach out to other races, other markets that he understood were superior in a certain field or in a certain sport. In this case, basketball. So there's only so much credit that you can give a man who was able to augment his financial portfolio by, quote unquote, giving you an opportunity. He was not doing it out of the kindness of his heart.
Yeah, it's we can't tell our story in a silo. I mean, we have had help in terms of, success in this society. And a lot of times what happens is we are limited to a certain amount of space to tell our story. But
well, you know what? That's really not the excuse anymore. At one time, so-called black people could say that we don't have the ability to tell our story. And now with the internet, YouTube, social media, our people have platforms to tell our story. It's just, what do you choose to do with the platform that you have? This is not 1985 right now, where if a so-called black man wrote a book about black rulership in Europe, he could not even get it published. And in the 1990s, when certain men wrote books, they're accused of being, quote-unquote, Afrocentrist, etc. Now we're in 2018. Anyone can form a YouTube account, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever you choose to do, whatever platform you choose to embrace, and bring forth a certain message towards a certain target audience. There's no more room for excuses anymore.
But there's a full history of us. And I'll start with Popovich, because he made the statement that it's a racist country. Right?
And what he said was true. What he said was true. But you know what? When you have an empire, you have to maintain control of your empire by making sure that you implement a caste system. Every empire had a caste system. I don't care what it was. Whether it was ancient Kemet or Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. They all had a caste system. They all treated the indigenous with preferential treatment. When I say the indigenous, I mean the race that initiated the empire. They got treated preferentially. So when so-called black people understand the importance of preferential treatment amongst their own and stop trying to reach out and fellowship with other races before they do their own, then they will start to embody a quote-unquote ruling class mentality. And that's the solution. That's it.
And in order for this to be a racist country, you have to believe in the social construct of race. Race is not a biological construct.
That's not true, sir. That's not quite true. Because if that were true, then we would all look the same. So that's not true.
Construct. I mean, it's not biological. It's social and cultural.
That's partly true. But the social and cultural aspect was normally predicated off of the biological aspect. That's why I state that the term race literally means your seed line. Like, for example, when you read the Bible, When somebody was called an Israelite, they were of the sons of Israel. If somebody was called an Ammonite, they were of the sons of Ammon. Moabite, they were of the sons of Moab. See, people no longer can trace their patrilineal descent all the way back like that. So this is why there's no more association with actual race and racial designation. Now everything is just a corporate designation because we live in a corporate society. So what part of what Isiah is saying is correct, but his focus is more on promoting globalism.
And Greg Popovich and Red Auerbach, as men, did not buy into the construct of race.
That's not quite true, sir, and you can't prove that. What we know is that they're able to sell a certain image that they don't buy into, quote unquote, race, because it's what's best for them. You want to know when someone is sincere when they're doing something that they're not going to benefit from. That's when you know that someone is sincere. Now, if you were to tell me that that Greg Popovich was not the coach of the San Antonio Spurs, and he was running up to the White House and talking about how much he hates Trump and how this is a racist country, and he was not trying to court professional black athletes, then he would score a few more points. Still, he would not be a concern of mine, but he would score more points in regards to establishing his own validity, his own credibility. And the same thing with Red Auerbach. Our people, they want to be loved by the Caucasians so bad that they shed so many tears whenever they see a gesture like the gestures of a Greg Popovich or Red Auerbach or Steve Kerr.
They looked at all of us as human beings. And when we deal from a human standpoint, not from a racial standpoint, but just...
Now, you see how Isiah and Chris Webber are both accentuating that term human? Human is code word for I'm a globalist. Let's all hold hands as brothers in Luciferianism. And I've already touched on how Isiah Thomas has 2 homosexual sons. Please keep in mind that he is without a doubt a quote-unquote Mason. All right, he's one of these brothers who has the Twitter handle I am Isiah Thomas. That term I am is an allusion to them being a god. That's what Luciferianism is all about, is you saying that I am my own god. I am a god. All right, and I touched on this already. Certain brothers will try to state, especially the 5% of brothers, they'll try to pull Psalms 82 and 6, not understanding that the term God in Psalms 82 and 6 is speaking about you being a judge. Okay? That's what that term means in Psalms 82 and 6. Even Christ quoted it when he was mocking the Pharisees. It's in reference to the men of Israel being judges, not being omnipotent entities. So many of these high-level Luciferians, they hide behind a fake image on television when behind closed doors they have certain allegiances. And they'll normally project those allegiances on TV by trying to promote globalism.
But just from a human standpoint, then we are all equal. There's no black, there's no white.
You see that? You'll normally see the so-called black man trying to promote a disavowing of any type of racial designation. Now, as I've already stated, black and white are not real racial designations, but there is real culture. And that is not what Isiah Thomas or Chris Webber are trying to vouch for. They're trying to vouch for the Luciferian principle of humanism, which is everyone holding hands, coming together, shaking off your culture, which is very easy for the so-called black American man to do because he doesn't really know what his culture is. And basically trying to plead to the Caucasian man to look at him as an equal, as opposed to looking at yourself as a king. Someone with a king mentality is not concerned about equality, because when you have that king mentality, you're trying to strive for the best. All right. Equality and the equality doctrine is part and parcel of Marxism/socialism, the destruction of the classes. As long as so-called black people are pushing for equality, they're never going to be in rulership. Period.
Race is a social construct. It's not biological. W.E. W.E.B. Du Bois, who's
Yes, a homosexual with a Caucasian father, who also was himself a Luciferian. Yes, sir. And who also was the teacher of Bayard Rustin, the pansexual who taught Martin Luther King. Go ahead.
who's an historian. Race is a social construct, right? Michael Omi, Howard Winnett, my teachers at UC Berkeley, who wrote the book Racial Formations in the USA, said race is a social construct.
So you're quoting them, you're quoting other men, and that's supposed to bring validity because those are their opinions. In the U.S., race is a social construct, but it's based on the fact that it's a corporate title, it's a corporate designation. So the color coding of race was meant to assign various people from around the world a certain color, which was supposed to imply that the white was on top. So the Asian is yellow, the so-called Mongoloid Native American is red, the so-called black man is black, right? The Caucasian is white, of course, so on and so forth. These color codes were used to help decide and decipher how they were going to allot certain privileges via the government to these various groups, also to keep track of them. But there's a difference between a corporate designation and what real race is. If you were to go on if you were to go to a Native American reservation, they'll tell you what their tribe is. Yes, they're called the Red Man, but they know that that's not a real title. They'll tell you, well, I'm really a Sioux, or I'm Crow, or I'm Comanche, or whatever. Even though many of them are just Mongoloids trying to act as if they're the Aboriginal people, but you get my point. They know their tribe, right? If you were to go to people from so-called Africa, even though they're classified as black today, they won't tell you that if they're truly still in tune with who they are, even though many of them have been corporatized as well. They'll tell you, I'm Zulu, or I'm whatever, right? So on and so forth. It's the so-called black man in America who's always trying to push so hard for this humanist doctrine because he has no idea who he is.
Construct. And for those who choose not to opt into the construct of the social norms of America that we live in, right? If you choose not to participate in the construct, then you have the choice to view and treat each other as human beings. And that's what Red and Pop are talking about, and that's what they're doing. They're looking at all of us as human beings, not through the lens of race. And you have a choice, because again, it is a construct in America. It's not biological.
And Baron, it's blessed. We're blessed to be in a sport where it is the way that Zeke just explained.
Not quite, because race is biological, but you know, it is what it is.
I don't care if you got a beard or wear a beanie everywhere you go. You would be my man, and we win games together, sure. Right? We judge each other off the content, how hard you work, how, what's your character like in the locker room. What's kind of your opinion on Black History Month, Popovich, or any of these subjects?
I would say, for me, I agree with Pop too, because
you don't have a choice but to agree with Pop. I mean, let's be for real, bro. Most so-called black men on TV, if they want to stay on TV, they better toe the line of being a black liberal. They better not overstep those bounds. And if they can articulate themselves to exalt liberalism and humanism like Isiah Thomas did, then they will go a long way in ingratiating themselves with the upper management of the entertainment industry, that being the Caucasian Jews, who stipulate exactly what the cultural mores of the entertainment industry are, much like a Red Auerbach. The spiritual sons of Red Auerbach are the ones who control networks like TNT and NBA TV. So if Isiah Thomas wants to keep his employment, he better say what he said.
Because, I always say that we are a part of the history, we contribute to the history, but we're never written into the story, the overarching story of the history.
Well, you're never written in by people who are going to lie on your contribution anyway, so you should stop worrying about whether or not they write us in. Right? Research and write your own book, or research and deliver your own message.
And so, just Black History Month, for me, Black History Month is every month, all year, I think that, just in the NBA, it is majority black, right? But when you start to look at this month, right, and you start looking at all the events, right, that line up in this month and the opportunity to tell our stories, it never gets told, because this is the most eventful and the fun month where everybody pass out awards and get accolades.
Right.
So it's always overshadowed by, our stories and our messaging are always overshadowed by, big events.
And that's a great point. That's a great point by Baron Davis. February is awards month. It normally begins with the Super Bowl, and then they go into the Grammys and the Emmys and many of these other award ceremonies. And they have so-called Black History Month during the month, which many people say is the shortest month of the year. But to me, it's not relevant because, as he stated, you should be researching your history every day, and not being concerned with what the Caucasian depicts in his history books. He's supposed to exalt himself in his history books. That's his job. And that's why he tells you that he was in rulership during the medieval time period when he wasn't. That's why he tells you that he was the Greeks and the Romans, and they were only the Greeks and the Romans for a certain time period, as the Macedonians, when the Macedonians came down into Greece and conquered Greece and took on that title and that name for themselves, or under Imperial Rome from Julius Caesar on down, right? A little bit before that. No, not to digress, but the Caucasian Romans were able to take over the Italian peninsula in a series of wars in which they were able to conquer the darker skinned indigenous people. I believe the Samnite Wars of the mid 4th century BC and a bunch of other wars that they fought to finally take over the Italian peninsula. And they did not control the Mediterranean until they finally defeated the Carthaginians, who were the people known in the Bible as the Canaanites. All right. So that's how they came into the forefront. And their rulership didn't last that long as being the dominant aspect of the Roman Empire. It really only lasted through the first 12 Caesars. And then their power was middling at best after that. All right. Rome, for the most part, was dominated by people of color after the first 12 Caesars.
Our mainstream media. And I think that mainstream media needs to do a better job in brands and, our league and to tell these stories in our, whatever time frame we have or whatever month we have to be able to recognize ourselves in a part of this whole history, then not just as black people in history.
Big Dog?
Well, I also agree with Popovich.
Of course you do. All y'all agree with Popovich. You don't got to say that. I already know all y'all agree with Popovich. Behind the liberal blacks is always the liberal white man. I've been telling y'all that from the inception of this channel, from the very start.
Quick story, though. First time I met Bill Russell, he sat down with me for 3 hours. And basically he talked about how Red Auerbach had his back. They pull up in nice luxury hotels and they say, hey, black players can't stay here in Red. We get the whole team. They say, well, Bill can't stay here, nobody's staying there. So he definitely is part of Black History Month. He gave Bill and those guys the opportunity, gave Bill the opportunity to coach. So, he started something.
You know why he gave Bill the opportunity to coach? Because Bill Russell was most likely to coach for about 5 years before he was officially hired as the coach. That's why. Bill Russell was basically like the LeBron James of his day in regards to understanding the game and where everybody was supposed to be. That's why. He was most likely doing more coaching than Red Auerbach was for about 3 to 5 years before he was given the official title. And as I've already stated, the Celtics never won shit until Bill Russell got there. They never won shit until he got there, and they didn't win for another 5 years after he left.
Something, and we have a lot of African American coaches that have come and gone. And I live by a preschool, and it's the prettiest thing, because I drive by every morning by 8 o'clock and you see black kids, white kids, Chinese kids running around holding.
You see the dream of the liberal black. You see how concerned they are with all these other races. You won't see any other race talk about how everybody is running and holding hands like you do these so-called liberal niggas, man. And in their mind, they think that they're healthy. They think they're healthy. Because that's their priority, to force themselves on everybody else.
I'm holding hands. So it basically means to me that racism is taught. So like me, when I'm
Well, no, sir. Racism is a function of self-preservation. And I think that it's very telling that adult black people love to use children as a model for acceptable behavior in adults. When you're a child, you don't have any concerns. That's why you're not truly understanding of self-preservation, because your parents are preserving you. When you hit adulthood and you hit the workforce and you experience real society, then you see the dynamics of life and how important it is to prioritize certain things. Number one being self-preservation, as well as the preservation of your own. That's why people's conduct changes when they become adults. For some reason, so-called black people don't understand that. You cannot use the behavior of children as a model for how a society can be run realistically. I mean, unless you've been totally deculturalized and you have no intention on trying to figure out what your culture is. Or maybe Shaq is just talking shit because he knows he has to put forth a liberal spin to maintain his job. Who the hell knows?
When I'm out talking, I just try to get with the kids, because these older people, people that are stuck in their ways, you're not really going to change their mind. We can do all we can. We can speak on social issues, but Population made a great point. We are in a racially divided country. It is what it is. I just try to get to the kids because it's a beautiful picture. You see Chinese playing with Russians, Jewish playing with Muslims. It's just, a beautiful thing to watch. And I also agree with Barron. Every month is Black History Month. This is about American history, not black or white history. But I don't just celebrate Black History Month in February. I do it all the time, every time.
And you know what? I think we also need to put Red Auerbach in context in terms of what he and Bill Russell did during that period of time in the 60s, okay? So JFK was assassinated in 1963, Malcolm X in 1965. Listen to what I'm getting ready to say. In 1966, Red Auerbach stood up and said, Bill Russell will be the player coach of the Boston Celtics in 1966, okay?
I don't care who like.
Yeah, because he was tired of coaching and he realized Bill was the real coach anyway. You guys, you give these people too much credit. I did a video a long time ago where Shannon Sharp was giving so much credit to Skip Bayless. Like Skip Bayless was some Caucasian liberator for black people because he allowed Shannon Sharp to be on Undisputed and talk about race. Let me say this to the so-called black men. One of the main reasons why the so-called black woman has trouble respecting you is because they understand intrinsically that the so-called white man is the top level of this society, and many liberal black men give them too much credit. You guys give the so-called white man so much credit. So how could you expect your woman to respect you when you don't even respect yourself as much as you respect the white man?
I don't care who like it.
Again, 68, Kennedy's assassinated. 69, Fred Hampton's assassinated. And in 1974, that's when we started integrating public schools in the United States, and particularly in Boston.
Yes, 1974 is when they started to proactively integrate public schools, and we're over 40 years later, and have public schools helped the so-called black child, Isiah Thomas? Have they been beneficial in teaching the so-called black child? And the public school system was almost completely set up by socialists, by the way. I did a video on LeVar Ball, how he rejected the public school system, or the school system for his son. And I mentioned that there was a man named John Dewey, who was a socialist / Marxist, who was involved with teaching many of the top professors and teachers at the University of Chicago, who would be dispersed out throughout the United States to make sure that the public school curriculum would be based in promoting socialism. That's why they took the praying out of the public schools and things like that.
Think about that.
And why they promote false ideologies like evolution. And I'll be doing some more videos on that in due time.
About that. So Red Auerbach and Bill Russell are tied at the hip together in history. So you can't honor Bill Russell without honoring Red Auerbach for what he stood for in the 60s in this country. And that's why that's why society follows sport. Sport doesn't follow society.
And what does that say about society, that society follows sport, Isiah Thomas? The word sport means joke. Let me say this. Many of these guys worship basketball as a religion. That's why they take it so seriously. Sport is meant to be something that you can use as a microcosm for human nature, and that's it. But sports is used for social engineering, as Isiah Thomas just testified to. There's no doubt about that. And that's part of why society is being turned into a joke, because the term sport means joke. When you sport with somebody, you're joking with them. You're not supposed to put athletes on a pedestal and entrust them to lead you anywhere. That's an abomination, man.
Because in sport, we do look at each other as equals and as human beings.
That's a lie. There's a hierarchy on every sports team. Just knock it off.
Except for when they're talking about hiring people in management.
The Rooney Rule still don't come through yet. I mean, we gotta go.
But on the playing field, it's about who we as human beings who can help us win.
That's not true, Isiah Thomas. Please stop it, brother. We know for years that there have been racial aspects to who's been allowed to play quarterback. There have been racial aspects to who's been allowed to be a pitcher. Oftentimes, black pitchers, they'll be moved to the outfield. So, let's stop that.
Right? And that's what Red Auerbach and Bill Russell stood for. Now, when they walked outside of the arena, then they had to make the choice. Do they accept the construct, again, of race? And if you accept the construct of race, then on top of that, you are allowed to have racism when you accept the construct of race. But if we all are human beings, then we can't have racism or racist.
You know.
Well, you can have racism if people are trying to preserve their power, bro. And once you understand that societal layouts are based off of you either have power or you don't, then you'll understand what the genesis of the corporate racial designations are. There's always going to be a divide in this type of conversation because your observations are going to be based on what your motivation is. If your motivation is to hold hands with everybody, then you're going to be a humanist. If your motivation is to have a restoration of power and understanding and culture, then it's going to be disparate. It is what it is.
When we look at the climate of sports, then the Boston Red Sox was the last baseball team to integrate. And it's, juxtaposed to Red Auerbach doing what he did in the turbulent 60s. And I get a lot of chance to talk to Coach Popovich, and every time I go talk to him before a game, you go in there with a scrum, and I'm like with Marv, Kevin Harlan, someone, and we never talk about the game. He's given me books before. He gave me The Fire Next Time. Did you read this? Did you do this by Baldwin? And so...
Yeah, he's trying to make sure that you read up on all these liberal black authors like James Baldwin. Notice the type of books that he's giving you. A lot of these guys, they just don't get it, man.
Popovich to me is a man of character. He's a military man. He understands service, and so for me. Yes, he understands. He understands service, all right. He understands making you serve him through mind control. That's what he understands, Negro. And let me also say this for the people who might not like what I stated about race being a biological construct in response to Isiah Thomas saying that race has nothing to do with biology. You have to ask your anthropologists why they themselves state that the only 100% human being is the so-called black man. They state that. The Caucasian anthropologists state that. So it's nothing against Isiah Thomas. He's speaking on a biological aspect of humanity that he learned in a philosophy class. Nothing against him. I got love for Isiah Thomas. But this is what happens when our people are taught humanism. And humanism is an offshoot of Illuminism. That's why I tell you, brothers, about the black Illuminists. They're the ones who try to act like they're so-called pro-black, but they want to talk about evolution and all that other silly shit. Like I told one of these black Illuminists, I said, look, if you think you came from a monkey, you know why? Because you probably did, but you got to speak for yourself.
Don't put that shit on me. Sorry. I come from a line of men. I don't descend from no damn monkey or ape. Maybe you did.
So for me, I'm proud to be part of the NBA because it seems like out of the big four, we've been kind of the one to move forward. We haven't had a Kaepernick situation. We can wear "I Can't Breathe" shirts. I remember.
Ooh, yeah, you get to wear those T-shirts. That's making a huge difference. That's hoping you get closer to getting that hug, right, brother?
I remember saying that Trayvon Martin was killed and murdered and was treated wrongly. I remember being.
Ooh, did you feel empowered when you said that? Ooh, look, the good white folks at the NBA's executive office let me say that Trayvon got murdered and I didn't get in troubles. Thanks, you masters.
I remember being able to say that and not have a problem with the NBA. So I'm like,
you see that?
So I'm like you guys. I celebrate American history, which is our history, every month out the year. And I hope that for parents and kids that go home, now we have the internet. Now we have tools at our hand. And no, you aren't being taught Black American history in schools, but now we can still go out and find that history. It's not like...
Thank you, sir. You finally said something sensible.
It's not like when we grew up and maybe it was buried someplace in the encyclopedia. All you got to do is go type in some words and you can get it right now and understand where you've come from and how special you are.
Now listen to what Isiah Thomas is about to say. Now, this is what infuriates me about the so-called black man. You say all that silly humanist shit. Now listen to what he's about to say.
You are.
Can I just end with this one thing? These four brothers sitting here, we didn't all come from Africa.
Ding!
And there was there was a country before 1492, and our history goes way beyond 1492. So you can't start us at 1492. We were always here.
Ding! Hey! Isiah Thomas knows about the fact that a large bulk of the people here in America today who call themselves black or are called black were already here when the Europeans came here. Let me say this. There were black and white Europeans that came here to America. And Isiah Thomas is intelligent enough and learned enough to know that the so-called black man was already here. Read about what Verrazano said about the Carolina Indians when he encountered them. He states point blank that there's basically no difference between the Carolina Indians and what he called quote unquote Ethiopians, which is just a term that was used for black people, so-called blacks. All right. That's what he himself said. No, I'll probably be doing videos on this in the future, but you have people like you have nations like the Washita and the Yamasee, the black Mississippi, who were also migrated down into the Yucatan, became known as the Mayans, so on and so forth. But I mean, this just annoys me so much. A brother like Isiah Thomas, as learned as he is, spend all that time trying to push for humanism. And he knows that so-called blacks were already here. Let me rewind that.
All you got to do is go type in some words and you can get it right now and understand where you've come from and how special you are.
Can I just end with this one thing? These four brothers sitting here, we didn't all come from Africa. And there was there was a country before 1492, and our history goes way beyond 1492. So you can't start us at 1492. We were always here.
That's history only from us players. No, we love you guys. Happy American History Month. We back with some more players only. Only players, baby.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Isiah Thomas. As I already stated, that slave narrative about them bringing 400 million black people off the west coast of Africa on the bottom of sailboats, brothers, that's fiction. As a matter of fact, there were more so-called black people who were deported out of America to the west coast of Africa and to the Caribbean than there were brought over here. Okay? A large amount of so-called blacks were deported out of America to the west coast, to the country known today as Liberia and Sierra Leone. Many were brought over into Europe and brought before Queen Elizabeth and her court. Queen Elizabeth was also a black woman, by the way. I'll be doing a video on that. in the near future. I have some planned in regards to a lot of the history videos, but that'll come in due time. And most of the so-called black tribes from the coasts of America, the East and the West Coast, were deported to Cuba and Barbados and many of the Caribbean islands. Okay? So this is why they'll try to tell you that, oh, well, you know, when you see a so-called black person from Puerto Rico, they're really black, and all that nonsense that most of these pro-blacks and these Afrocentrists teach. They don't know shit about history. So damn annoying. But anyway, good for Isiah Thomas. He has the knowledge and he had the courage to say what he said, so good for him. But anyway, peace.